First of all, for anybody interested, this is not the Succession podcast because I know that they have put a lot of effort into interviewing the cast for that. They've had the directors of the show. They've got the showrunners themselves. They've got a host that has like personal experience with the Murdochs. So if you're interested in that podcast, you should go listen to that first, probably. This one's just our initial reaction to the finale, to a show that we both, I think, very much enjoy.
Yeah, I thought that the first 2 seasons of Succession were some of the best on television. The third season, I thought I had like mixed feelings on it because I felt like it was repetitive in its storytelling, just trying to find a way to make Logan Roy kind of lose his memory every single episode.
I like the first season. I do think that the ending of the first season, it didn't jump the shark, but it jumped something. So in the second and the third season, I wasn't as into it. The fourth season brought me right back into this world, and I really enjoyed it. I think it was somewhat of a masterpiece if you take in the third episode and the funeral episode and then this episode. I think altogether it's going to round out into something of a 10.
I feel about this the same way I do about like Peaky Blinders, because I was talking about whenever Peaky Blinders was on, whenever it comes to just lighting, acting, music in the background, it's always just able to do that excellently. And I thought here it's the same way. The music for this, like for the whole show, for all 4 seasons, I thought was great. The acting, you're always assured it's going to be top notch. And I definitely think season 4 is better than season 3. I think season 2 is still probably my favorite out of all of them, but I agree, season 4 was really, really good.
Suffice to say, there's not much to talk about in the first few seasons. I find it funny that you're comparing it to Peaky Blinders. I don't think Peaky Blinders ever had quite the audience that this is getting. Yeah. I think people are more comparing it to Breaking Bad, to The Wire, to some of the best shows of all time.
What's so funny about it, when I learned about it in 2019, I checked the IMDb score. It had like a 7.5. I think season 2 at that point was just airing. And then actually right as the pandemic started, I checked it again. It had an 8.5. And by season 3, it was already breaking records. And same with this season. Viewership-wise, this thing is through the roof.
Now that it's done, though, who do you think is most relieved? The guy in charge of making 1,000 different versions of the same theme song to play throughout every single episode? Stewie, knowing that he doesn't have to side with Kendall anymore in his crazy shenanigans? Because Stewie, no matter what, they kept on treating him like he was a wild card.
Yeah.
But he always sided with Kendall, even when Kendall didn't even side with himself. Kendall backstabbed Stewie in the first season. I think he's backstabbed him several times. And yet Stewie, even though he just comes in there kind of as like a sly guy, he's always on his side. He is a good friend to have in a weird way.
They really tried to make it seem like he was going to turn on Kendall in this episode.
Maybe a little bit. I mean, he still did get the board seat, and it seems like everything worked out for him in the end, so that's good. But I'm sure he is still relieved. Or do you think that it's all the elephants in the room that all seem to get addressed finally in this last episode? Like, what is more relieved in that situation? The songs, Stewie, or the elephants in the room?
I would say the elephants in the room.
Yes. So what were the elephants in the room to you? Because I have listed a few.
So obviously the first season at the very end, Kendall getting in the car crash with the person who inevitably died because of it.
Kendall killing someone is definitely an elephant in the room that got brought up way later than I thought it would. I thought when Kendall was originally trying to sell Shiv and Roman when they were in Barbados.
Yeah.
And he was saying, I'm the one, that someone, especially when they started talking about killing him as a joke, like someone would be like, wait, he actually did kill someone. But that's not brought up until the very end.
It would have absolutely helped in that situation than when it actually came up.
Yeah, it's better if it would have come up there than when it actually came up. But I think for dramatic irony and for like what had to happen in the show, they obviously moved it back. And then also Shiv and Tom not being in limbo anymore. I think that's an elephant that finally got addressed. They obviously had their blow-ups throughout the season, particularly episode, 7?
Yeah, episode 7.
Yeah.
Well, one of the best scenes that like everyone calls out as being one of the best in Succession. Also, another one I would say is probably Roman speaking with his dad and finally just letting it, like his family know, I was in contact and the dad did say that he wanted me to have it.
I think, along those lines, the dad telling everyone that they should be the successor. The name of the show is Succession, and yet all the kids have always been pretty cagey about saying, like, they're always like, I want to be the person in charge. However, they're never like, Dad promised me, and then gone through, like, how he promised them. Like, they were finally able to see, I think, through a filter, or through it without the filter, who was promised what, when, and how they were being constantly manipulated from being kids. And so, in a way, they're victims, but then you can't side with them totally because they are very spoiled and they really have... In one way of putting it, this is called a tragedy. That's what the showrunners have said.
Yes, it absolutely is.
However, everyone came out winning, you know? they all get tons of money. It's hard to watch the episode, especially the ending, and think to yourself, these guys are walking away with everything they could possibly ever want. This is a great scenario for them, but it still feels like they're not winning. So it's weird. They've done a good job manipulating the audience.
It's so funny you say that, because obviously the last shot of this episode really just does show the tragedy, especially for Kendall. But a ton of people on Reddit were saying $2 billion, that's what he's making. Like, this is supposed to be the worst day of his life.
Yeah, you heard his argument to it, though, was that he was promised this. He's thought his entire life about taking over the company, but if he's not able to do that, he has no reason to exist. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like he's going into an identity crisis. I also liked how Colin was in the background, because he had promised Colin, who was the bodyguard for his dad, the one that the dad said was his best friend, a job later on. And you actually saw that he's working for him despite everything.
One thing I really want to mention is that it felt like this episode, at least when they were talking, especially when Kendall was kind of promised by his siblings that they would vote for him, the conversation seemed to really have more stakes to it than the show had for the last couple seasons. Because really...
They like to dangle a lot in front of you and then dance around the subject a lot, and then have people shift sides and stuff. But this was the first time in a while that they all got aligned on the same side, Shiv, Roman, and Kendall, to go in there together and fight for it. Like, at the beginning of the seasons, they had that alliance. They were trying to work on the 100 together, but they were never in complete alignment as to who would take over their dad's stuff.
And not only that, and not only that, Logan was in the way, no matter what. Yeah. Now it was like, no, they're definitely going to be doing something. They decided to align behind Kendall, and I thought that when they were talking about getting votes, or when you were talking about Matsson getting so mad learning about this whole situation, Greg probably doing the smartest thing he's ever done in this whole entire show.
I don't know
doing
if that came across smart.
When he had the app and he was able to translate it, that's the idea that I'm talking about.
Okay.
I'm saying that is one of the show I thought was really entertaining to watch. At 90 minutes, I thought pacing wasn't even a problem, really.
Pacing wasn't a problem. What I would say the biggest weakness to the finale was that it kind of it ditched the president storyline. Like, those were great stories where we saw the election get overthrown, but like the whole point of having the guy in place was that he would cancel the deal. And yet it didn't seem like he mattered at all. Like,
he's not even in the final episode.
Yeah, in the previous episode, they made note that Shiv had gone up to the president with Matsson, and they kind of like agreed on him letting the deal go through. But that doesn't mean that he necessarily would have. And yet, by the last episode, he's not even mentioned.
Yeah, I didn't even realize that.
Also, the whole thing that Kendall floated by when the India numbers came out for Matsson, which weren't good, and he was still trying to buy Waystar, Kendall was like, we can actually turn around and buy GoJo because these numbers are so bad with negative publicity. They had ATN. They didn't decide to make that a big issue, and Kendall never sought after trying to buy GoJo out from under them. I literally thought after they introduced that scene with Frank where he was like, Frank, we can buy them out, that was going to be the rest of the season. Nothing ever happened with it, which is another one of the show's positives because it does dangle off like these really enticing false threads, and so you think it's going to go one way and then it goes a completely but it's still a weakness to me because I feel like it was something that should have been expanded upon. Also, it feels like Jerry, as much as they included her in every episode after she got fired, kind of in the periphery in the background, it feels like she missed something that that not apology from Kendall or from Roman, but like something. There had to be, I feel like, some form of resolution or complete dispatchment, and I guess they had maybe a quick passing word at some point where she was like, no, I'm not going back to work for you.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what the scene, the very quick scene with Roman, seeing Jerry kind of walking through the office was maybe supposed to be like the conclusion of that storyline, but I agree.
But that's what I didn't like because
I know,
it didn't feel
I understand what
complete
you're saying. Yeah, and I agree with you on that front as well.
The episode itself was very interesting because it starts off with Shiv in Matsson's camp. She thinks that she's going to be his CEO, but then what happens is that there's this Time article, it's a magazine article, but it reminded me of the Time article with Bannon when he came out, when Trump was elected, and there was a picture of him on Time's cover being like, this is the guy behind Trump. Yeah. This is the guy controlling his strings. And before you knew it, Bannon was cut out of the Trump administration. Similar to with what happened to Shiv, Matsson said several times that it wasn't a problem. It was funny to him,
yeah,
but it clearly wasn't. Like, clearly that was the thing that pissed him off.
Oh, yeah.
And he just, because he's such an egomaniac, because he's such a narcissist, he didn't want to admit to the fact that a magazine got under his skin.
And what is so funny about that is even before he offers Tom, because that's eventually who he decides to give the offer to kind of back him.
Which is such an interesting, sleazy maneuver.
He says right beforehand, he's like, no, I thought the cartoon was funny. This has nothing to do with that.
Yeah, that's
Instead,
what I was talking about.
He starts to give an excuse about how he wants to, like, fuck Shiv and how he's pretty sure he could do all that. It just really, they tried this season to show that Mattson was just a freak. Like, especially when they're talking about him sending blood to different employees and things like that. Sexual harassment.
And the lady who he did that to, I forgot her name, but she still works for him, which is, and so does his number 2. So Greg, outs Mattson's plan using a translator app on his iPhone, and then Kendall tells Shiv, because they're all in Barbados trying to get Roman's vote. At the same time, their mom, who I thought it was nice to have them as a family there, especially with Logan gone, reconnecting, and they're all vying for that last vote. That's when Shiv turns coat and she says, okay, we'll decide upon one of us. Mm-hmm. And that's where the big argument happens, and it follows with the resolution that it seems like the show has been veering towards the entire time, because it felt low-key like Kendall has been the main character of this entire time.
Yes, I agree with that. And when they finally do decide to make it Kendall, it was like the show, I think for the first time ever, had a feel-good couple scenes where you're able to see them really bond, and you're seeing Roman lick cheese, and they're making him this disgusting drink, and Kendall has to drink it. And then
there were a lot of funny scenes in this. The impressions that they did.
Yes, that was one of my favorite moments.
Where they started making fun of each other, like they started doing an impression of Kendall. It felt almost like it was off script, like it was like it wasn't part of the show. Frank running out of the room later on when he realizes that the votes are not as equal to the company getting bought out, and Roman and Shiv planning to murder Kendall.
I was laughing so hard, honestly, just when Mattson even offered the position to Tom, because I was like, this is so ridiculous, yet somehow the show was able to make it work.
It's just so strange that Tom is the one who wins. And apparently the showrunner, Jesse Armstrong, right, had that opinion for a long time.
And not only he had that opinion, so there is a famous TikTok that's gone viral now by this person who I think his username is Newberry, who predicted that Tom was going to get it based off his surname, because he realized while watching other shows that characters that have surnames of famous people, and I think for Tom in this case it's a baseball player, apparently always have some type of success, and he was able to do so and ended up being right. Yeah.
Okay, I think you're Wambaskins or whatever his name was. All right. The other funny thing was not Greg, surprisingly. Usually Greg and Tom have this like back and forth between them that is the funniest part of the show. Not as much here. They got to do a fight. And yes, at the end, Tom does save his hide and says, okay, you actually work for the company, and he is protecting him. But it wasn't nearly as funny as some of the Gregisms that we've gotten over the years.
I agree.
One of my favorite jokes ever is, and I think you know this one, is when they're on the stand in season 2, is it?
Tomlet?
Yeah, and apparently they were like, in your text message, Tom, we see that you texted Greg every minute on the hour by the hour. You can't, what?
You can't break a Tomlet without...
You can't make a
Tomlet without breaking a few Gregs. Yes, I agree with that. I did like seeing Greg finally, after being spineless for 4 seasons, he has 1 second where he finally stands up for himself and actually slaps Tom back, which I think is the only moment we've ever seen like that.
Right?
What?
When Tom is throwing the water bottles at him, doesn't he start throwing the water bottles back?
Yes, but this was like one of those things where it was like it's supposed to show the growth in his character. I did also see the foreshadowing in the 4th episode when Greg walks into the room and he's hoping that he might be the second in command due to the letter that Logan has left over. Mm-hmm. And obviously by the end of the episode, he almost has more power over the company than the siblings do.
So Greg wanted to be part of the quad. So if Shiv and Kendall and Roman had been able to stick together and have that front, then he would have joined them in the ranks. I don't know if they would have allowed him up to their level, but he definitely would have had a high position in their company. I also found it funny how quickly Shiv just kind of like ditched his name, or dropped his name to Tom.
Yeah.
Because Tom clearly, in the episode for the election, he was impartial. I think he didn't care if the company was sold or not. Mm-hmm. He just wanted to be assured a place in the administration or the ATN field, right?
I agree with
he
that.
wanted to stay on his job. So he was more, I guess, leaning towards the Shiv and Roman and Kendall side. So maybe Shiv assumed that was still where he lied, and that's why Shiv was comfortable dropping that Greg had told him that information. But like obviously Tom had made the decision by not telling Shiv that he was going to replace her as CEO, that he was definitely completely in Mattson's camp.
People were pointing out also how Tom in episode 9 is like one of the only ones not to attend Logan's funeral, and in the end he ends up being the one to get it. And I think that is a interesting kind of dichotomy or story piece.
There's a lot of going back that you can analyze it in that way. One of the interesting things that Tom did though was immediately when he got the power, you saw his face go all stoic, and he remembered in the in the fourth episode when past Logan, right? When the people are all battling it out and it ends up going to Kendall and Roman to take over.
And
but Tom had floated himself.
Shiv, yeah.
Well, Frank and the other guy and like a bunch of people laughed at Tom when he brought up his own thing.
Yeah,
they insulted him.
Shiv literally was like, the only person who was vying for you, and she was talking about Logan, is dead. Like, he's gone. You have nothing here.
Well, not only her, but Frank's friend. I forgot what his name was, but like he went after Tom pretty hard, and immediately Tom fires them. He says they're off the sheet.
They're gone.
Yeah, after the entire season, he was afraid that he was going to get fired, but he is keeping Jerry, which was ironic, and then he also was keeping Katerina, who was Hugo's like other. You know?
Yes, right.
So it was interesting that he was making probably good moves, but at the same time, very selfish ones. And then he also sort of wins Shiv in the end. So let's get down to Shiv's decision here, because I think that's where it comes down to. Yes. So they are all teamed up as a front to go into the board meeting and vote to cancel the deal, keep the company, and have Kendall take over.
And as far as they know, they have the numbers. Because
but this is the thing. Shiv's decision is ultimately the one that matters. It's 6 versus 6. She has the last vote.
It's very reminiscent of the vote of no confidence held in episode 6 of season 1.
Yeah, and that's why I like season 1 so much, and I like the parallels here. They all even copy some of the shots, like when Logan Roy is walking into a room and it follows Shiv walking into a room, and some with Kendall as well from the first episode. I think even the first scene. But was it justified? Is really the question.
Yes.
Like, what motivated her? Because I have a few things. I think it was justified in the end. I mean, obviously, by the way his reaction was. I think it was also rash, though, but also somewhat strategic. Here's why. So if it wasn't Tom, I don't think that she would have made the decision.
That's fair.
If Kendall hadn't been so cocky going into the board meeting, because he sat down and he was like trying to like bustle up and be like, yeah, we got the votes. You know, if he had come in there with a little bit more humbleness, maybe that would have changed her opinion. And if the vote wasn't so close, if her vote didn't matter, I think she wouldn't have cared.
I agree with all of your points. What I like so much about when Shiv goes into that room and then Kendall and Rowan follow afterwards is it's just so Shakespearean to me. It's the part in Coriolanus where Coriolanus is asking for peace when he's on trial, the part where Hamlet figures out that Ophelia is dead, because the second that Kendall loses it is the second and starts talking about how he faked the story about the death. That's the
even
moment.
Before that, though,
that like, is the. But I feel like that part specifically is the moment where it was like everything is gone. This is the tragedy that we're talking about. But you were saying you think even before that?
I see it as this. I see it as people don't change, and that's what the ultimate message of the show is that no matter what happens to you, if you're a terrible person or if you're messed up inside, you're not going to fix yourself, which isn't really a great message to have. But if you think about it, Kendall starts off the show and he's power hungry. Then he accidentally murders someone because he gets crazy high on drugs. And then in the second season, he's kind of like depressed about it. But by the third season, he's like come back from it. But he's never shown to be completely over it.
That's
and
true.
At the same time, the father's death is definitely impacting everybody. There's a lot of emotions going on. But what it comes down to is that, Shiv, in her wavering, realizes or points out something. I think it was almost a test. You know, when she was like, you can't be CEO, you killed someone.
Yeah,
and it was
it's
like
the way she said it. I agree, yeah.
Not in the way she said it, but if he had responded like, you know what? Yeah, I did. And I have tried to make my amends for that, but you know that I can run this company. Like, if he had handled it coolly, I think that would have convinced her to be like, okay, you know, you're right. But it was instead that he just started trying to make a deal. Like, it was clear that he had gone back, he had regressed back into the form of himself where it was like, I have to lie just to get what I want. And we've sort of seen traces of that throughout the season, where he's gone behind his brother's back to try to put out like negative stuff about his dad, to try to promote the new ownership of the company.
And you could say that even Roman is kind of testing him in that scene as well, talking about the bloodline and how really Kendall doesn't have a bloodline because of his kids.
Well, I think, yeah, once Shiv found the water, it was like a shark, or the blood. She was like a shark. She like bit into him. Then Roman was like another shark, where he just ran up there with another thing. The thing is that like in the 7th episode, when Tom and Shiv had that big falling out, they said things that, like Shiv said in this episode, were unforgivable, right?
Yeah.
But that was them at their worst. They like cut deep and raw, and they said, and so she knows Tom at his worst. She also knows her brother at his worst.
Mm-hmm.
And she, I think, in that second when he freaked out, measured those two things up and said, between the two of them, I trust Tom more.
Yeah.
Which is so sad in a way, because you just saw in the previous scenes where they were having such a swell time together. They even anointed him with the smoothie fit for a king or whatever, which was so gross.
I know. I was sad because I guess I was still on Kendall's side, because obviously it's called Succession. You want one of the kids to get it, and you know it's not possible. But even when he walks into the board meeting, and you're hoping that there's some, at least I was, you're hoping there's some type of way that Shiv maybe changed her mind in that 1 second. But yeah, they turned to Frank, and Frank is like, or it wasn't Frank. It was.
I was not. By the time that Kendall freaked out, it was like you could not.
That's what I'm saying. That's where the Shakespearean thing came into play. You knew that it was done, but I was hoping at that moment that there was something that was going to save it. No, the deal with GoJo goes through.
The dumb thing is that we shouldn't have ever expected it. Like, after some of the moves that these people have made, any one of them, as Roman said, they're all assholes or they're all bullshit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, none of them should have been ever put in charge. But in this episode, they're able to lead you up to a point, making you almost believe that they should.
Yeah.
You know, they're almost able to convince you again. And that's what makes the show so good. It also reminds me of when Shiv said in the election episode that you're a good person to her brother. She was truly lying.
I know, yeah.
Because
it's
at the time it was like, she sort of believes that, but like I think this is where it's proof that she never thought that to begin with. She just thinks that he's broken. And
even when there was some stability in this show, you always knew that there was some undercurrent that was going to ruin it. Like even in episode 4, when Kendall and Roman are like, yes, Shiv, we will keep you in, but you cannot technically be part of the members, even though you will have everything that one of the creators has. You knew that was going to come back to bite them. It just continually happens.
One of my problems with this season, though, is when Shiv turned to Matsson so quickly in that one episode. All it took right after the father's death was them going to wherever it was, like Norway or somewhere in Scandinavia, and just hanging out for a few days. And literally that one conversation where Matsson is able to convince her to go onto his side just by promising her some power in his bank. It never made as much sense that it sunk so thoroughly into Shiv's mind, and that she wouldn't be ready for.
Though. The show addresses that, like, that's literally what Kendall and Roman are saying. They're like, you flipped for Matsson so fast, even when he gave you a little bit of power. I think that was said this episode.
Yeah, and so that's what makes it funny, that they all came in with a united front in the last scene to go and make this vote. And you knew as soon as they started splitting off, something's got to happen here that doesn't work. At first you think, okay, maybe it's Roman, because he starts freaking out and he's like, I don't want to be here. I see Jerry. And then Kendall does the thing where it was like, because Roman is such a masochist, he likes to feel pain, and it sort of wakes him up.
Yeah.
And so like he makes him break his stitches with that hug.
By the moment in that board meeting, it got to Stewie, Roman, and Shiv.
And Stewie was as much of a friend as possible.
Yeah.
He's always just like, I'm on Kendall's side.
It was one of them that was going to have to flip, and obviously Shiv being the last one, and after all the things that you mentioned.
They also give a shot where Shiv looked at Stewie's, like the guy who works for Stewie, the one, the Pierce guy? No, it's the person that Logan disliked, but the person who was in the wheelchair who also has 2 votes.
Right, yeah.
And Lauren, I thought, or something like that was the name of the other vote. And when she said yes, that she wants the deal to go through, Shiv was like, oh no, now that means that I'm the one who makes that vote. And so that's where she really got to thinking. And then I think the strategic part of it was like, yes, even if I vote this through and I work things out with Tom, this will be enough of a good move for Tom that I think he'll forgive me for everything. And I think we can not work things out, but definitely I can win both the money that I'm going to get from the deal and also still participate in this company.
I think, and especially when they're in the limousine and Tom is kind of holding Shiv's hand, that was very Logan-esque. They obviously wanted to make you look, they wanted to make you think that Tom really was for it. I wonder if in reality this actually would still be able to hold up, because as we learned from Mattson, he says it early on to Tom when he offers him the job. He's like, I need a pain sponge. Like someone to basically take all the blame so that I can be under the hood.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I don't think that Tom is fireable at this point. Like, as I think by putting him in there, as much of a lapdog as he is, he's definitely going to be stuck. Like he's got the power, so he's going to be able to do as much as I do find it funny that Mattson actually did dislike Greg by the end, though, because up until then Greg had been working his way into Madsen's inner crowd pretty well, and Tom had been pretending that he hadn't. He'd been like, Greg, you're about to get fired but like now he actually was the one saving him, and I think that's where Tom likes to be. The way that the show kind of makes you sad, though, is that like this is the end of that brother sister trio relationship. Like they are no way they're not coming back from this. They're not going to work on the 100 together. Like there was enough of a divergence there, and enough was said. I think that this clearly not only shows the succession of the company, but it also says this is done.
I think it ties beautifully back into the first episode as well, when Logan Roy has the heart attack and he's taken to the hospital, and you see that he's just completely out, and really in the first season they made it seem like he was on death's door, and that final shot with Kendall, which I think that they've had like in memory ever since the show has started, or they've been wanting to make that shot for a long time. I think it's kind of supposed to show someone who, he's still alive. That's the difference between him and Logan in those two scenes, but really just completely dead on the inside.
Yeah. It was nice not having a backflash, too, of Logan. You would get different parts of him. Like, even in this episode, they did the send-off because they had a video recording of people having a good time and singing.
I knew he was going to have to come back in one moment, yeah.
Yeah, but they didn't ever try to cheapen it by, like, showing us a full backflash scene or something like that. And then Connor, of course. Yeah, since he's the fourth sibling, he, I guess, is still in a good relationship with everybody, but he might not actually get the ambassadorship that that he was promised, and so he might be staying in the apartment with his wife, and his wife is not a fan of that. She liked the idea of just having this super rich New York place to herself while her husband was away and them doing long distance, which was funny.
Surprised how little he was in this show for. I understand he's kind of been a supporting character, but I liked his final scene as well. Overall, what would you give the episode?
This show's getting the episode's definitely getting a 10 for me. I think this is my first 10 that I'm going to give out, but I don't think it's undeserved or unexpected. Yeah.
I don't feel like the show had any shortcomings. I'm going to give it a 9.5 out of 10, just because I feel like kind of what you were mentioning, the Jerry and even Tom getting it is just so crazy to me a little bit, even though the show is able to explain it well. I'm going to give it a 9.5. It
makes more sense that Tom gets it than any of the kids, even Kendall. You can probably convince yourself of that if you think of all the things that Kendall has done in his past. Even that moment, I think it was last season when Shiv came out releasing that article that was so negative to her brother. Mm-hmm. Like, I think it admitted that he did the murder, or maybe that he was a drug addict. I forgot what it was, but it ended with him like in a computer thing trying to like stop the article from going out, and like his hands in his face in his hands. The family's gone through so much. I also like how they dangle different threads, like the Peter thread. When they went to Barbados, I legitimately thought before he took the phone call from Greg that we were going to get a scene where Peter and his friend were going to convince them to do something completely different with the company, and then they were going to go to New York and start doing. And
I thought so as well. Over. Yeah. I think you were supposed to, because when Kendall was coming back into the room, I was like,
an ex machina moment.
What did they say? What's going to be the driving force for the next remainder of this episode? And no, it was just nothing.
Yeah. All right. Well, other than that, anything else you want to say?
No, that's about it.
I think this sets up great for next season. That's all I'll say.
I do think Connor's wedding, I would give that episode a 10, and I do think that's my favorite episode out of this season. My least favorite, even though I know it has that scene between Shiv and Tom, I think is episode 7, the tailgate party. I guess felt like not a lot was actually.
The tailgate party is the one where I thought they were going to go after GoJo. Mm-hmm. Like I thought that was Mattson's foible or fall. I also liked in that episode where Connor was like discussing different ambassadorships, and then like Mattson in the background is like pointing that he trusts himself. Yeah. The last thing I'll say is that like James Cromwell was in this episode, right?
Ewan.
Yeah, Ewan, and he plays the brother that was like not friends with Logan, but he would like show up every once in a while. I think that's the relationship that you're looking at with the siblings now, with Shiv, Kendall, and Roman. I think that they're going to distrust each other and they're going to hate each other, and in a weird way, this ending is kind of the most fair because the bad guys didn't necessarily win.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
I mean, they're more anti-heroes.
Yeah, it's weird. It's a weird show, but yeah, it was good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna miss it. All right, thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode. Hope you enjoyed this one. Bye.
Bye.